Herzogenaurach, Bavaria, 1943. Allied bombers are overhead. The air raid siren has already stopped, which means the bombs are falling. In the town's concrete shelter, Rudolf Dassler is already sitting with his wife and children when his younger brother Adolf climbs in with his wife Katha. The shelter shakes, dust falls from the ceiling, and Adolf mutters something that will destroy a 25-year partnership, split a town in half, and create two of the most recognized brands on Earth. He says, "The dirty bastards are back again." He means the planes. Rudolf is certain he means Rudolf. That sentence, 6 words spoken in terror during an air raid, set in motion a family rupture so total that the two brothers would never speak again. They would build rival factories on opposite sides of the same river. They would weaponize Olympic athletes against each other. They would divide their towns so completely that for decades, residents checked strangers' shoes before deciding whether to speak to them. Herzogenaurach became known as the city of bent necks, but the Dassler brothers did not start as enemies. They started in a laundry room. Adolf Dassler, known as Addy, was born in 1900. His brother Rudolf was 2 years older. Their father worked at one of Herzogenaurach's small shoe factories. Their mother ran a laundry business from home. When both brothers returned from the First World War, the laundry had lost every customer. Germany's economy was collapsing. The family needed income. Addy had an idea. He loved athletics and had apprenticed as a cobbler. What if he made shoes designed specifically for sport, not general-purpose footwear, but spikes built for running, studs made for football? The problem was that post-war Germany had no materials and no electricity. Addy solved both. He scavenged leather from abandoned army helmets, silk from broken parachutes, anything he could find in the fields around town. He rigged a leather trimmer to a bicycle wheel and pedaled it himself to generate power. Rudolf was the opposite personality. Outgoing, aggressive, a natural salesman who could talk anyone into buying anything. In 1924, the two brothers formally registered the Gebruder Dassler Schuhfabrik. Addy made the shoes, Rudolf sold them. The combination worked beautifully. Within 3 years, they had outgrown the laundry room and moved into a proper factory. By the late 1930s, they were selling 200,000 pairs a year. Then came 1936, and an opportunity that no money could have bought. The Berlin Olympics were the first games ever televised. Addy loaded a suitcase with handmade running spikes and drove to the Olympic Village. His target was Jesse Owens, the American sprinter favored to dominate. Equipping Owens was dangerous. This was Hitler's Olympics staged to demonstrate German racial superiority. A black American winning gold medals in German shoes would humiliate the regime. But Addy approached Owens anyway. Owens wore the Dassler spikes. He won 4 gold medals. The world heard about it on the radio, saw it in newsreels, read about it in every sports section, and the Dassler brothers' shoe factory became internationally known overnight. For the next 7 years, business boomed. Both brothers joined the Nazi Party on May 1, 1933, the same day as a mass recruitment drive that swept hundreds of thousands of Germans into membership. Rudolf was the more committed. He joined the SS, Hitler's paramilitary organization. The factory pivoted to producing military boots for the Wehrmacht and used prisoner-of-war labor. Both brothers were, by any measure, complicit in the regime they operated under. And then came the bomb shelter. The sentence. The fracture. What happened next made everything worse. In 1945, American forces occupied Herzogenaurach. They nearly demolished the Dassler factory entirely. It was Kath, Addy's wife, who saved it. She persuaded the American soldiers that the company made only sports shoes. The Americans became customers instead of demolishers. But Rudolf received no such salvation. He was arrested, accused of being a member of the Waffen-SS, and held in a prisoner-of-war camp for nearly 2 years. He was convinced, absolutely certain, that Addy had informed on him to the Americans. Among Addy's papers, investigators later found a letter that appeared to support this theory. Whether Addy actively betrayed his brother or simply failed to help him remains disputed to this day. What is not disputed is that Rudolf believed it completely. He blamed Katha most of all. Rudolf was eventually released. The denazification tribunal classified both brothers as Mitlaufer, fellow travelers. No criminal penalties, but the personal damage was total. The brothers, who had built a business together for 25 years, could no longer be in the same room. In January 1948, Rudolf moved across the Arak River. He took 14 employees with him and registered a new company. He called it Ruda, then renamed it Puma. On August 18, 1949, Adi registered his company with 47 employees. He called it Adidas, combining his nickname with the first three letters of Dassler. In the same year, he registered his first shoe bearing 3 stripes, a design he reportedly acquired from a Finnish company called Karhu for the equivalent of 1,600 euros and 2 bottles of whiskey. The town split with them. It was not subtle. Adidas employees drank in Adidas bars, shopped in Adidas bakeries, sent their children to schools on the Adidas side. Puma families did the same on their side of the river. If an Adidas worker married someone from a Puma family, both sides treated it as betrayal. The two sports clubs would not play each other. Each company had its own butcher. The football clubs would not play each other. Children grew up understanding which side of the river their family belonged to before they understood what the companies actually made. For decades, the first thing anyone in Herzogenaurach noticed about a stranger was which shoes they were wearing. The feud outlived both founders. It outlived their children. It became the town's identity as much as either brand. And now the brothers had a new way to fight. Athletes became soldiers in a family war. The 1954 World Cup final in Bern is remembered in Germany as the miracle. West Germany faced Hungary, unbeaten in 4 years and heavily favored. It rained. The pitch turned to mud. Adi Dassler had developed boots with revolutionary screw-in studs that could be swapped for longer ones in wet conditions. The Germans changed their studs at halftime. They won 3-2. The nation credited the shoes almost as much as the players. Adidas became synonymous with football overnight. Rudolf was not far behind. His son Armin proved as aggressive as his father. At the 1960 Olympics in Rome, Armin signed sprinter Armin Harry to wear Puma spikes in the 100-meter final. Harry won gold, then tried to switch to Adidas for the medal ceremony, hoping to collect fees from both brothers. Adi banned him for life. The incident crystallized what this rivalry had become. Athletes were not partners, they were ammunition. The escalation continued for 15 years. Puma signed Eusebio for the 1966 World Cup. Adidas countered with blanket coverage of entire national teams. Puma produced the Puma King football boot. Adidas locked down sponsorships from FIFA, world football's governing body, through Adi's son Horst. At the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City, sprinter Tommy Smith won the 200 meters in 19.83 seconds wearing Puma spikes. On the medal podium, Smith removed his shoes, held them in his hand, and raised a black-gloved fist in the Black Power salute. He and John Carlos stood shoeless, representing the poverty of Black Americans. The photograph became one of the most reproduced protest images of the 20th century. Puma was forever associated with that moment, a cultural significance that no marketing budget could have purchased. But the most audacious move in the history of sports marketing belonged to Puma. In 1970, the two companies held an informal agreement never to sign Pelé. Both knew his price would be astronomical and that bidding against each other would bankrupt them. They called it the Pelé Pact. Armin Dassler broke it. He reportedly paid Pelé $120,000, roughly $3 million in today's money. And then his representative Hans Henningsen conceived a plan that would justify every cent. Before the quarterfinal kickoff between Brazil and Peru at the World Cup in Mexico, Pelé walked to the center circle. He raised his hand. He asked the referee for a moment. Then he knelt down, slowly, deliberately, and tied his bootlaces. Every camera in the stadium zoomed in. Hundreds of millions of viewers worldwide saw a close-up of Pelé's feet in Puma King boots. It lasted only seconds, but it was the most expensive shoelace tie in history. Brazil won the tournament. Pelé was named player of the tournament, and Puma had engineered a global TV moment for a fraction of what a conventional advertising campaign would have cost. 4 years later, at the 1974 World Cup, Johan Cruyff refused to wear the Adidas-branded Netherlands kit. He was contracted to Puma and felt so connected to the brand that he played the entire tournament in a custom shirt with 2 stripes instead of 3. He won player of the tournament. Adidas, which had sponsored the Dutch national team, could do nothing. The brothers had fought over athletes. The next generation would fight to own the games themselves, while Puma was making cultural moments. Adidas was building something larger and more dangerous. Adi's son Horst Dassler was sent to France at 23 to open a factory. From that base, he spent the 1970s cultivating relationships with the most powerful men in international sport. He helped João Havelange defeat Stanley Rouse for the FIFA presidency in 1974 by organizing political support across African and Asian federations. He positioned Adidas as the commercial engine behind global sport. and in 1982 he founded a company called International Sport and Leisure, ISL, in partnership with the Japanese conglomerate Dentsu. ISL's stated purpose was to commercially exploit sports marketing rights on a global scale. Before ISL, sports bodies negotiated sponsorships independently and inconsistently. ISL industrialized the process. It acquired exclusive rights from FIFA and the International Olympic Committee and resold them to broadcasters and sponsors at enormous markups. Its actual operating mechanism was simpler. ISL secured those exclusive contracts by paying federation officials directly. When Swiss prosecutors finally investigated, nearly a decade after ISL's bankruptcy in 2001, they documented 138 million Swiss francs in bribes paid to sports officials. João Havelange and his son-in-law, Ricardo Teixeira, were the primary recipients. Jean-Marie Weber, ISL's chairman, defended the payments in court as, quote, legitimate business expenses necessary in the sports business world. Horst Dassler did not live to see the consequences. He died of cancer in April 1987, aged 51, but the infrastructure he built, the mechanism by which marketing rights were purchased through official bribery, outlived him by decades. When the United States Department of Justice indicted 14 FIFA officials in May 2015 for what Attorney General Loretta Lynch called a 24-year scheme involving well over $150 million in bribes, they were describing a system that Horst Dassler's ISL had invented. The 2015 case was structurally the same machine, run by different operators after ISL's collapse. Adidas itself was never named in the indictments. ISL had become legally separate after the Dassler family sold the company in 1993. The institution that built the corruption infrastructure escaped prosecution for it, but Horst's death triggered a different kind of collapse. Without him, Adidas lost its strategic center. His mother Keitha had died in 1984. Adi himself had died on September 6, 1978, when the company had 17 factories and $1 billion Deutschmarks in annual sales. Now, with no Dassler left who understood both the product and the politics, Adi's daughters sold their shares. New management made catastrophic decisions. In 1992, Adidas posted a record loss and stood within months of bankruptcy. Across the river, Puma was dying too. Rudolf had died in 1974 of lung cancer. His son Armin had taken the company public in 1986, the first Dassler company to access public capital markets. But the same forces that destabilized Adidas, the loss of founder vision, market shifts toward lifestyle, and Nike's explosive American growth, were killing Puma simultaneously. Both companies, born from the same family, built by the same hands, nearly died in the same year. Meanwhile, something was shifting in the culture that neither brother had anticipated. In 1986, the same year Armin took Puma public, the hip-hop group Run DMC released a song called My Adidas. It was the first non-athletic endorsement in Adidas history, the birth of sneakers as cultural identity, divorced from sport entirely. The rules of the industry the Dassler brothers had created were changing beneath their children's feet. Nike had entered the market in 1964 as a mail-order company selling Japanese running shoes from the back of a station wagon. By 1992, it was generating $8 billion a year. The American upstart had overtaken both German originals while the brothers' descendants fought each other. That humiliation, the knowledge that a third company had conquered the market their father and uncle created, added a particular bitterness to both near-death experiences. Both were saved by outsiders who arrived in the same 12 months. In 1993, Robert Louis Dreyfus became the chief executive of Adidas. He was heir to a commodities trading empire, had run Saatchi and Saatchi, had no emotional connection to the Dassler brand, and saw exactly what it needed. Adidas, he decided, did not need reinvention. It needed direction. He turned it from a sales-driven company into a marketing-driven one. In 1995, he took it public on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. The transformation was immediate. Within 2 years, Adidas was profitable again. Within 5, it was growing faster than at any point since the 1970s. In the same year, 1993, Puma appointed Jochen Zeitz as chief executive. He was 30 years old, the youngest chairman of a German public company in history. Where Louis Dreyfus made Adidas compete head-to-head with Nike on volume and performance credentials, Zeitz chose a completely different path. He moved Puma upmarket into sport lifestyle, fusing fashion with athletics years before anyone else saw the opportunity. In 1998, he collaborated with designer Jill Sander on luxury versions of classic Puma silhouettes, anticipating the sneaker culture explosion by a full decade. Both survived, but they survived into different shapes. Adidas grew into scale and acquisition. In 2006, Adidas bought Reebok for $3.8 billion to challenge Nike in North America. 16 years later, they sold it for €1.7 billion. The math is brutal. Nearly €1.5 billion in value destroyed before counting operational losses over a decade and a half of failed integration. Puma grew into premium positioning. The Pinault family's luxury empire, through Kering, acquired a controlling stake by 2007. They eventually spun it off in 2018, but the Pinault family retains 29% through their holding company, Artemis, to this day. Both brands had survived bankruptcy. Both had found their footing as public companies competing in a market their founders had created. But the battle was about to move from the pitch to the culture, and one partnership would prove more explosive than the original feud. In 2013, Kanye West walked into Adidas headquarters with a proposition. Nike had treated him as a mascot with no royalties and limited creative freedom. Adidas gave him everything: full creative control, a dedicated design team, a 15% royalty, triple what Michael Jordan received from Nike. A former Adidas executive who worked on the partnership described it this way: "We knew what we were doing was history in the making every minute of it." It worked beyond any reasonable prediction. The first Yeezy shoes sold out in 10 minutes. By 2021, the partnership generated roughly €1.2 billion in annual revenue. Yeezy accounted for half of Adidas's online sales. The stock price had tripled since the deal was signed. Then, in October 2022, Kanye West posted anti-Semitic statements on social media. He wrote, quote, "Go DEFCON 3 on Jewish people." Adidas took 3 weeks to terminate the partnership. 3 weeks during which the world watched a German company with Nazi-era origins decide how long it could tolerate anti-Semitism for the sake of revenue. Josef Schuster, president of the Central Council of Jews in Germany, made the connection explicitly. He cited Adidas's founding history when calling for the company to act. The past reached forward across 80 years to demand an answer. The financial damage was immediate. Adidas posted its first annual net loss since 1992. Operating profit collapsed from nearly €2 billion to €268 million. €1.3 billion in Yeezy inventory sat in warehouses with no buyer. It took 3 full years to clear the wreckage. The man who saved Adidas was Bjorn Gulden. He arrived in January 2023 as the new chief executive. His previous role was running Puma. For a decade, Gulden had led Puma's revival, rebuilding the brand Jochen Zeitz had repositioned. Now he crossed the river. The rivalry that began with two brothers had produced an executive who moved from one empire to save the other. Gulden cut bureaucracy. He pushed decisions down to designers and marketers rather than funneling them through committees. He gave his personal phone number to all 60,000 employees. By the end of 2024, revenue had recovered to €23.7 billion. Operating profit grew nearly fivefold. The crisis was over. Adidas had survived its second near-death experience in 30 years. In September 2009, Adidas and Puma employees had staged a football match in Herzogenaurach. 61 years after the split, 35 years after Rudolf's death, 31 after Adi's. It was organized by a peace charity, covered by international media, and described as symbolically burying the hatchet. The companies remained fierce rivals. The match changed nothing, but the image persists. Two sets of employees, wearing their respective brands, playing football on the same pitch in the same small town where two brothers once made shoes together in a laundry room. Adolf Dassler died on September 6, 1978. Rudolf Dassler died on October 27, 1974. They never reconciled. They never spoke after 1948. They are buried in the Herzogenaurach Municipal Cemetery, positioned as far apart from each other as the grounds physically allow. Two brothers, two empires, one sentence neither of them could take back.